Today we're going to be a little bit inventive, so I'm kind of just been mucking around with this pattern a little bit, creating kind of my own fly pattern. I'll try to do that a little bit more often. In this particular case, at least for right now, I'm just calling this the Haddon BB Nymph, or the Haddon BB Nymph, where the BB would stand for Better Baetis. So this is going to be a mayfly Baetis nymph pattern. Common mayfly nymph patterns that you'll see and use are going to be, you know, your pheasant tail or your hare's ear. But I am going to start out by putting the tails on here, and for the tails I'm going to just use this micro fibbet material. This is a golden brown black barred, so we kind of get a kind of a barred pattern on here. And I'm going to be very specific, and I am just going to grab 3 of these. I'm going to go ahead and secure these to the top of the hook here. I'm just using some Semperfly nano silk here. So once I have those kind of in position, I'm checking for length. I'm okay with that as far as length goes, so I'm going to just take my thread forward a little bit here. Go ahead and snip those ends off, leaving myself some space to do the thorax. So from here I'm just going to come back down to the back end of the hook, and I do want to just continue to focus on trying to keep those fibers here on the very top of the hook shank. So I've got it this far. There are 3 fibbets there. I'm actually going to take a loose wrap underneath those fibbets. Then I'm going to pull kind of upwards a little bit, and while I'm pulling upwards I'm going to start wrapping my thread, and that will hold that tension in place. But by sinking a thread wrap underneath here, it'll just help prop those up just a little bit. Flat copper wire here, and I'm going to tie this in. I'm going to want this to stay on the lens side of the camera, so I'm just going to kind of hold that in place. Take a couple of thread wraps just to kind of get this situated to about where I want it. I'll turn my vise to the side a little bit just to check and make sure I'm keeping that along the lens side of the camera, which you should be able to see at this point. And we're not going to cut this off. I'm just going to grab right here, and I'm going to just pull this backwards until I get the length that I'm looking for here, about where the thorax is going to start. From here I'll probably take some thread wraps to work on some of my tapering. Okay, so with that in place, I am going to turn to an ostrich plume. In this particular case we're going to be using sort of a tan color. And I'm going to use this to try to help create some gills on this pattern. So Baetis typically have gills. I've got my one piece out here like this, and I'm going to strip it almost like I would a regular piece of hackle, so that I'm tying on a bare shaft of the feather here. So you can see what I've got here, where I've kind of stripped most of those away. I've got a couple hanger-oners. I think I got them there. So that's kind of what we're looking at, is something like this. So we're going to go ahead and tie this material in. And again, I don't want the very first wraps of this to be right at the very tail end of the hook. So I'm going to go ahead and put a thread wrap or 2 in here, and I'm going to check it for whether it's too far or not far enough. It's going to be right about there. So I've got my 2 main materials in here at this point. So what I'll do, like I always do, is kind of turn my vise sideways a little bit. That just helps me see the profile better. I know it doesn't show as well on the camera, but It's really important for me to be able to see the profile that I'm creating here in terms of a tapering. Then I'm going to just kind of bring it up here, and we're going to hold right here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our wire. So this wire is going to be part of the body, but it's also going to be sort of a track that's going to allow our ostrich to kind of follow that all the way up. And again, I want a little bit of space where the tails are. So what you'll see here is I'm deliberately creating some gap in between each one of these wraps of the flat copper here. Just like so. Trying to keep those as even as I possibly can. And then we'll be pretty close to the front here with that wrap. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take, a few wraps up towards the eye of the hook. These don't need to be neat or anything. The only purpose I'm doing this for is to add a tiny little bit of extra weight onto the pattern. So take a couple of thread wraps over the top of that. I'll take a few thread wraps towards the eye of the hook, just like so. Probably turn this up on its side a little bit, and I'm just going to use my helicopter method, where I'm just going to kind of twist this copper, flat copper, until it breaks off. So now I'm going to take my my ostrich, I keep wanting to call him peacock, and hold that pretty much straight up perpendicular to the shaft. And I'm going to be pretty deliberate in what I'm doing here, but basically I'm trying to have the stem of this wrap in between each of those wraps of copper wire. So that's the reason why I kept that gap in place, is it becomes sort of the track that this will follow, moving up the shank of the hook here. And it should want to slide right into those gaps. So once we get it here, I'm going to go ahead and take my thread off of my bobbin cradle, and we're going to just go ahead and secure this ostrich herl piece in right here. So I'm going to kind of wiggle my thread a little bit to not trap as many fibers, and then maybe somewhat pull that ostrich feather a little bit towards the eye of the hook as I'm making these turns with my thread. Kind of just like so. I'll come over to the other side here, and then I'm going to just kind of sneak in here with my scissors at this point, and we'll just go ahead and remove this piece of ostrich. So now that we're here, this is just something I've been working on. I am just going to go to town with my scissors here on the very top, keeping them flat with the top of the hook here. Maybe curving it a little bit over either side, but you can see I'm just munching away here. What I'm doing is I'm trying to create gills, which mayflies have. Now I'm going to turn it upside down and do the same thing on the bottom, where we're just going to kind of go through and munch away with our scissors a little bit. And what that does is it keeps that fluff that we're looking for, but it only keeps that fluff mostly on the sides, on either side of the shank of the hook. That way I'm not puffy underneath, I'm not puffy on the top, but I'm beginning to have something that looks a little bit more like gills coming off the fly here. One thing that you'll see with the mayflies is the gills are actually going to be if I can find my bodkin. The gills are typically shorter in length, and then they move up in length as you move up the body of the fly. So as I turn this around to face the camera, hopefully that's what you're seeing now a little bit, is kind of that. It's skinnier, moving up, fatter as we move towards the top of the hook. You begin to see that copper wire through that material, which is what I want. And I'm going for, again, this is just R&D, something I'm just working on. But when I've looked at mayflies, of course there are a million, not quite, but there's a lot of variety of mayfly out there in the world. And some of the ones that I've seen are more blonde. The thorax, or the abdomen, is a little bit more blonde. You know, an abdomen that wasn't quite as dark. Could certainly do that with a hare's ear as well. Potentially with the pheasant tail. Pheasant tails tend to be a little bit darker. I'm going to start out with a piece of scud back. In this case, I'm using kind of a latex color. I'll get that on there, pull it somewhat tight. Mostly here, I want to make sure it's going over the right over the center of the hook. So I may do a little rearranging until I get exactly what I want there. So with that, I'm going to tie in two more materials here. One is we will tie in just a little bit of peacock, one peacock curl. So I'll remove that from the stem. So that's the part that was attached to the stem. Usually what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up near the top, because that's where it ends up. The stem is not quite as thick. And I'm going to go ahead and clip the very top off there. And then I'm going to go ahead and tie this piece of peacock in here. Just like so. Again, this way, not again, but that's one of the things I really like about this nano silk, because it leaves no footprint. The next material, I'm going to turn to my ostrich again, except this time we're going to use more of a dark brown to give us a nice fuzzy and dark thorax here. So I'm just going to find one feather here. We're going to go ahead and tie that in now. Just like so. We'll bring that back to where we're going to have that thorax start. And then I'm going to just kind of tighten that down. I can't see the stem, but I know it's long. So I'm going to turn that more towards me a little bit, just so I have access to it for my scissors. And I'm going to go ahead and clip that stem off, just like so. And then from there, I'm just gonna, we're gonna tidy up just a little bit. Knowing that I'm gonna be tying a couple of materials along here, I want to make sure that I have a pretty smooth foundation of thread here. Go ahead and grab the top of this, and I'm gonna want to take some pretty good just touching wraps with this material. Try to move our scud back out of the way a little bit. Do kind of some jerky back and forth motions here with my thread to just try to minimize the number of fibers that I end up trapping, because I don't want to trap too many of these. I'll just take a couple of wraps there, then I'll pull the whole thing back here, and I'm going to just take another couple of wraps up here. Then I'm going to kind of circle in here with my scissors. Try to get a good bead on exactly where this piece of ostrich is tied in. I don't want to cut too many fibers, but I also don't want to leave any of this ostrich just hanging out there. Now I'm going to take my peacock curl, and I'm really going to take just some loose wraps. This is not necessarily to make this more puffy. It's to kind of give it that kind of a shine that will be visible in this thorax here. So just taking a few wraps here with that peacock curl, and then same kind of operation where I'm going to kind of wiggle things back and forth a little bit like that to trap as few fibers as possible. And then we're going to give ourselves some thread, and we're going to make some turns towards the eye. From there, I'm going to go ahead and clip off the balance of my peacock curl here. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put on, I'm going to use some of this dyed brown partridge, and I'm going to use this as kind of the legs. So I'm going to go searching for a spotty, nice marked one. So I've gone through my bag, and I found a partridge feather that is kind of exactly what I'm looking for here. No broken tips or anything. Now I'm going to clean this up by turning it sideways, and I'm going to pinch at the very top of this, and I'm just going to strip away the fluffy stuff here at the bottom. It's like so. I'll flip it over. I'm going to do the same thing on this side here. So I have a nice clean stem that I'm working with. My feather should be looking about like that right now. Probably did that like 100 miles an hour, so this is what we should be looking at here. From there, I'm going to cut a tiny little notch in here. And basically, I try to hold it up here with my fingers. Try to narrow the opening on my scissors as much as possible, and then just go sneak right in there like that. And we're going to cut that notch in here. So I'm going to turn this a little bit towards myself, but basically I've got the V here, and I want that V to go right up against the nearest wraps that I've got. So once I've got that in place, I pinch really, really tight. But my thread wraps, I want to be a couple of loose thread wraps. Then I'm going to pull straight up on those thread wraps and maybe take another couple. That gives me a chance to, number one, keep this material from rotating. Your thread will have a tendency to want to pull those hackles or those legs back a little bit, or around the hook with the tension on your thread. And since I still have my handle on here, you can see those legs there a little bit longer than I want, not a lot, but I can grab hold of that handle now, and I can just very carefully pull that back a little bit until I get those legs exactly where I want them. Then I'm just going to secure all of that down a little bit with a few more thread wraps, just like that. From here, I'm going to circle in, and I'm going to want to get this cut off as close as I can. So we should be sitting about like this right now. I've got those dark legs kind of poked back. I'm going to pull this partridge down with my fingers, basically just sweeping over the hook like so, and I'm going to trim this top just a little bit, not a lot, but you can also use a flame and just singe it. I've done it both ways. Just trying to be more careful. What I've recognized is when I was doing it with the flame is every now and again I would catch these partridge feathers on fire as well and lose everything and then start all over again. So now we're back to our scud back. We're going to pull this right over the center and let those wings or those legs kind of stick back backwards where we want them. And I'm going to just take a thread wrap here Make sure I've got it about where I want. The more I stretch it, the thinner that wing case is. The less I do, the thicker that wing case is. So again, I'm just going to take a few wraps there. I'm going to take a few wraps in front of this material as well. And in theory, that should be pretty good to go. I'm going to come back in now with my scissors. I'm going to give this a stretch as I cut it. That'll help that kind of suck back in under those thread wraps. So I've got that about right where I want it. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and come in and we're going to whip finish this. And then we have a little bit of extra work that I like to do on this particular pattern, at least as I've been working on it here. So I'm wanting these thread wraps more towards the back, where that scud back is, because that's where I want this to be thickest. We'll be throwing some UV on this. So I'm really not overly concerned about anything coming undone. My thread ended up on the bottom, like usual. I've got a nice dark marker. I'm going to be fairly careful here. I don't want to go wild, but I do want to basically color up this latex a little bit with this brown marker until we get something that's going to look about like that. This is UV clear loon, and it's the thin. So we're going to just get ourselves some UV on that, on the end of our pin here. I'm just going to let that kind of, I want it to kind of coat that piece of scud back that we just put on and colored brown. And then we're just going to hit it with our torch here for a moment. I'm circling back to my tails now, and I want them to kind of poke up a little bit. And I'm also going to want that three tail look. So I'm very gingerly working on trying to separate those three. So kind of when we're finished with that little operation here, hopefully you can see we've got those three tails. We've got them kind of splayed out. Glue on those tails. I've tried UV, but the UV will actually break itself off a little bit. So I'm just going to barely touch back here, let that kind of soak in a little bit. So there you have it. This is, again, just it's a beta. I'm trying something new here. For right now, I'm just calling it the Haddon BB Nymph for Better Baetis. So the couple of things that are a little bit unique here is using the micro fibbets for the tail, not actually situating them until I'm done with the fly, getting them separated into the fork kind of pattern, throwing down a tiny little super glue to hopefully keep those together, using the ostrich and the copper on the body to create kind of a blonder body, but also a set of gills moving up there. We've got the UV coated and colored brown nymph skin going across the top, and then some dyed brown partridge there for the legs. So that is the pattern. I'll probably continue to muck around with it, and I'll continue to report back on it. It is getting a lot closer to, if it's not there already, it's pretty darn close to where I wanted it before. So this is one I'd been working on for a while. So let me know what you think.